Representative Rick Glazier is a member of the Education Subcommittee that's part of the Appropriations Committee. Long title, big job, Representative Glazier. What do you make of what was released to you this week?
Well, given the targets that the subcommittee had to use, I think that's the beginning problem. But I don't think there's any question that the best way that I can sum up the education budget is horrifically destructive and breathtakingly massive in its cuts.
Even if your opinion is destructive and it's massive, is it necessary given the amount of money the state is pulling in for tax revenue?
Well, that's the classic case where the question you ask sort of gives you the answer that you're designed to.
Didn't try to do
that. There is a 1-cent sales tax that we put on for the last 2 years in order to try to balance the cuts with revenue and make it a responsible approach to governing. The majority right now has chosen to not want to discuss any revenue, including continuing that 1-cent sales tax that the vast majority of the public thinks is fine, because the trade-off is clear in their budget proposal. The trade-off is thousands and thousands of state employees. It's 8,000 teacher assistants. It's thousands of faculty members. It's 10,000 classes at UNC. It is cuts galore to all of the categories of public education, 21% of assistant principals, 15% of non-instructional personnel. There are so many folks who are going to lose jobs under this proposal, and the damage will be so destructive to K-12 and to the university system particularly, that it would take a generation to really recover the quality that we want to have. And are people really saying that they're unwilling to keep the 1-cent sales tax and have that as the alternative? And I don't think that's at all what the public believes.
Well, I would think the Republicans ran on a mandate of reducing government, right-sizing, and they say this is, I mean, if you ask them, it's going to say this is that term right-sizing. We're getting government where it needs to be.
Well, government, politics is about the getting elected, but governing is a different story. And sometimes you run on positions where you believe in them at the time, but then you come to know what the facts are. And nothing is in governing generally any longer black and white. You govern with nuances and with flexibility and adaptability. The goal ought not be just what we promised ex-voter. It ought to be what we really promised ex-voters in the state is to do our absolute best to move this state forward. And sometimes both sides have to give, and sometimes both sides have to learn about what that is. I don't think the destructive nature of this budget is at all what the voters expected or voted for. Downsizing and finding efficiencies is critical, and we've been doing that actually the last couple of years. And there are some things in here that do that. But the depth of the cuts, the kinds of things that would happen are way beyond efficiencies. These are into the absolutely core of the quality of what we call public education in this state. And this is not a budget upon which this state can move forward or progress.
Let's dive into the numbers. The public school K-12 funding would be an 8.8% budget cut, and it's
about $700 million.
That's the least of the community college and university system cuts as part of the package. What do you make of the idea of cutting 8.8%? But you keep every teacher in the job. You do eliminate teachers' assistants from second grade up, at least using state money to pay for them.
Except that you're not at all keeping every teacher in the job. I mean, that's just not a proposition that meets the facts. You've already got built into the budget for K-12 $300 million in discretionary cuts that were in place. The systems, in order to continue to meet that, because it's continuing, have to cut positions, and a lot of that is classroom because they have nowhere else to go. Now the new majority is adding $42 million in discretionary cuts this year, $100 million next year, at the same time that their line item cutting dramatically all of the other places that you could possibly take money, pretty much eliminating textbooks, massively cutting into supply money, cutting into assistant principals, non-instructional personnel. There is nowhere left to cut. The districts are going to have to cut teachers. Now they may, because of the budget provision, have to cut their locally paid teachers in order to sort of switch it out with state positions. But anybody who looks at this budget and tells you that teachers' jobs are saved is simply fooling the public.
Are you saying that's a purposeful misleading of the public? Everyone, Representative Holloway says we have funded every teacher's job.
I think that it is, and I think that there's a wish to believe that. the same way that the last 2 years we funded every state position teacher, but we were clear, we weren't funding every teacher. We didn't save every teacher's job. We saved every state teacher's job the second year that wasn't cut that first year, and we weren't talking about the local cuts that are going on. And so if the majority's position is that we have not specifically cut any new state teachers, that's one thing. To say that in fact this budget doesn't cut state teachers is simply not true.
Community colleges, enrollment funding, they're saying 100% they are going to maintain that, but a 10% cut overall, and will increase tuition to $10 per credit hour.
Yeah, you're reducing access, obviously, at the same time that there's a $30 million cut to financial aid, or $37 million, I think, in this budget. And you're requiring a $45 million cut or so to the college. So you giveth with one hand, you taketh away with the other. And so, yeah, they're funding enrollment growth, but they're also cutting everything that comes in enrollment growth with a direct budget cut. So community college not gaining anything, plus having some pretty big line item cuts down the line on other categories of funding. Although I think that given the three systems, community colleges comes out a little bit better than the other two, despite the percentage.
Let's go to UNC System, 15.5% cuts. Representative Holloway says, you know, to preserve the classroom, the universities need to take the disproportionate share, I guess the heavier of the burden of cuts. They get federal money, private money, they raise money, have tuition.
Yeah, well, I think, again, you've got to put things in context, remembering there were hundreds of millions of dollars of cuts to the universities the last couple of years that they took because we require them to, and that they took on management efficiency studies that Erskine Bowles started. There's no question at all that what they've done with this $500 million cut to the universities, let's put it in perspective, that's equal to the budget, the whole budget of 5 universities in the system. They have cut an amount that would close 5 of the 16 campuses in the system. Nobody can look at that and say that's not directly affecting quality. Our projection is that it would close 10,000 sections of classes, about 4,000 faculty members and assorted instructional people cut. From the university that's the best in the country and is the one sort of driving economic force in the state, I think this is more disastrous to them than perhaps any other aspect of the education budget.
Next week, I understand you could offer amendments to these budget options.
Intend to.
We will be following that very closely. Hope you'll be back to share your insight as this process takes shape and final form.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you.
You take care.